Hello and welcome to You Matter, episode 6. Hello and welcome back to You Matter. My guest on this episode is Helen Preston, a physiotherapist with whom I have a fair amount in common, both being female physiotherapists of a certain age, clinic owners, both, if we're honest, recovering perfectionists, and if we're honest, with a little way to go on that recovery. This conversation covered an awful lot of things, actually, but we talked about permission to stop and evaluate. We talked about the fact that COVID may have been involved in that permission process or part of that permission process recently, not just for us, but probably a lot of other physiotherapists and business owners alike. We talked about the cultural and social drivers of perfectionist tendencies. And we had a really good discussion about how things might be different for ourselves and for the next generation. It is an introspective conversation, but it's also an extremely positive one and certainly left me with a positive view of the future. I hope you enjoy it. As always, I'd really love to hear your comments and thoughts. And if you like the episode, then give us a rating on whichever platform you're watching. And I will be back at the end of the episode. Thanks for listening. So hi and welcome back to episode 6. I'm pleased to introduce today Helen Preston. So Helen is another of these people who I've actually never met in person but got to know really well through the pandemic. And Helen completed a course of coaching with me. So as ever, when you go through a coaching program, you get to know someone pretty well. And that definitely happened with Helen. She was an absolute joy to coach because she came to the process so open and at a point in her life where she was really willing to change. And I'll let her tell you a bit more about that. But I've also been so impressed and have enjoyed watching Helen's decision-making and actions after coaching. She's really doing some great things in the world of physio. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So Helen, over to you. Would you introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks for having me, Jo. My name's Helen Preston. I've been a physio for 26 years this year. I started off in Birmingham doing what was the junior rotations, and then took over my father's business. So I'm a I'm third generation physio, sixth physio in my family.
Wow.
My grandfather was Peterborough United physio for 25 years. So I still treat patients that remember Albert. My father started his business in 1969. So as a business, which I took over, so Prestons Health, which wasn't called that at that time, but my dad was working next to our family home since 1969, so it's a 50-year-old business. I took over in 2000 and have navigated the business through a significant change in how I wanted to manage private patients. So that was, looking back on it, was probably just gut feel and driving in the way I felt, the way I was going to go. So I don't think, looking back on it, when I took over, I was very young, really. So I'd only been qualified for 4 years.
Oh wow!
Looking back on it, looking back on it, I didn't have the end in mind when I started. I think it's fair to say.
Well, how old were you then? 4 years qualified in your early 20s, presumably.
Well, yeah. So I was one of those. I'm the 18. Only just 18 off, you go to uni and then qualify only just 21. So how old was I then? I'd be 25. Yeah.
That would have been quite a lot of forward thinking to be looking at the end point at 25, I would say.
I literally got on the treadmill running, and actually it's really interesting doing this process of coaching now. So through my time after life coaching with you, it's identified quite a lot of relationship issues that I have with my business. So I'm also having now some business coaching. And I said yesterday, I now look back and just wish I had sort of taken a bit more time to identify some of these issues early on, because I started the business almost the wrong way round, in that I jumped on a treadmill. My husband, we came back to Peterborough in 2000, which was just after the Sydney Olympics. And my husband had a massive life change from being a professional athlete to joining Cambridgeshire Constabulary. And we jumped on the bandwagon of sort of taking over my father's business, which was really busy. I did try and combine that with an NHS job, but it just was too busy straight away. And of course, most people who go into practice have a slow lead in. So, I've never made life easy for myself. And, there I was, rabbit in the headlights, with two very different practitioners, working very differently. I was of this new, probably quite cocky generation of this is how I want to do it. And so, I get on really well with my dad, but I think it's a good idea. We only stuck about 6 months together. He was very adamant he was going to retire. So it was now or never for me to take over the business at that point. So I just ran with it. And really, I kind of feel like the only time I've really stopped to evaluate what that treadmill was when I decided, right, okay, I've actually had enough of that drive of burnout. I think I've got enough survival mechanisms in my body to recognize before I got there, if I'm honest, which is when we made contact, and I was like, I'm going to go with this. I want to spend some time on me instead, and my, and how I can improve my relationships with all the different things that I juggle in my life. But it was the first 20 years of being in private practice. It was the first time I actually started looking into my drivers, and there we are.
Great. Well, not great, some of it. Thank you for the history. Can I just circle back on a couple of things? So you mentioned having got into this position really young, and the legacy of Albert and your dad. And you said at that time, I wish I'd addressed some of the issues earlier. So do you think, firstly, what are the primary issues at the moment that you are dealing with or were dealing with and made you seek coaching? And how do you think those might have been different compared to Albert and your dad's life as a physio?
Wow, that's a really
it's a multi-layered question.
It's a multi-layered question that I might have to have too many multi-layered answers. I mean, look, let's not deny being a woman is really different, particularly, with the generation of my father's generation. So in 2000, I took over the business, which was next to our family home, and it was like a little. My dad hates me calling it a shed or a garage. It was a large little sub building next door to the house, I actually bought the house off my parents, and rebuilt this clinic to get it multidisciplinary, so that, because I knew I wanted to have a family, and if I wanted to have a family, I knew that I would not be able to put the legwork in. My dad used to work from 9 till 9 at night. Wow. He'd have two little lunch slots where quite literally he used to go and have a little bit of a lie down and watch the news, and that was his life, and that is pure dedication, but I knew that was not the view of physiotherapy that I wanted to work for me. So it was juggling that, and then so I had children in 2008 and 2009, and not really did I ever consider the impacts of that. I think deep endemically, I recognize that I am a survivor.
Yeah.
So, I'd made this decision to do this business, and I also wanted to have children. And I wanted to be able to juggle all of that. And I did so, probably aspects of it at the expense of expense of really thinking about my well-being, I think, is the answer to that.
And how did that show up? That paying that price for surviving, how did that show up in your life?
I think, I also think I've been around enough really great people in my career, and friends who are physios, to recognize that I didn't get anywhere near true burnout, in terms of any real health issues. Thank goodness. I think I'm blessed with very good genes. But I also recognize there's a tipping point for everyone. And certainly in terms of COVID, we could go really deep with all of this, but it also came down to giving myself permission to prioritize myself, to see where the direction of this business was taking me. And COVID was just, in terms of its effect on our business, we are based in a gym, so we absolutely had to shut. And it gave me a complete and utter threat response around how on earth are we going to survive, because my worth is kind of like linked with my business's survival, to, oh my goodness, it can survive, and I can actually spend a bit of time doing things differently. Our family life in lockdown actually thrived, and I was like, okay, I'd really want to come out of COVID, or that particular lockdown. Of course, we're not out of COVID, but with a legacy that was a positive one, which I actually knew would look deep down. I knew that would help business and that would help the patients staff in the long run. But I wasn't prepared to take the risk of that if I hadn't been forced to, if that makes any sense at all.
So it sounds like in some ways, COVID triggered a period of reflection. Do you think, obviously you can't know because COVID did happen, but do you think there's any likelihood that you would have reached that period of reflection without COVID having forced you to change behaviour?
I think the only way possibly that would have happened would have been an event. So it's almost like I possibly would have had some sort of health issue, or somebody else having a health issue that forced me into it. I think it was probably, who knows is the answer to that. But I think I see myself as somebody that always has to see themselves as giving myself permission to do it.
Yeah.
And I think I would definitely advise others. I think I've said to you, one of the things about creating this space, to think, you learn so much about yourself in that time, that actually I can be really creative and productive if only I give myself space. Going back to what you were saying about what's different for you, and I think the thing for me is I've always wanted to strive towards doing my best. I'm trying to keep away from the word perfectionism because I'm trying not to admit that, but I wanted to be the best mum I can be. I want to be the best physio I can be, and probably actually the fact that the business was probably actually the stressor in that. I probably didn't ask for help on that early enough. And so, yeah, that was the difficulty for me, was always trying to actually put the children first, which is absolutely what I wanted to do. But I never had strategy. It's not that I couldn't do it. I think it's just that I never had strategy around how I do it. And that's what that coaching helped me create, I think.
There's so many interesting things in your recollection there, and so many that certainly I resonate with, and I'm sure lots of others listening will too. Not least that your very honest answer that probably you wouldn't have stopped if COVID hadn't happened, unless an event had happened to you, or I think you also said if something had happened to somebody else. And I think that really highlights that in some ways COVID was this big catastrophe that happened that gave us permission to what we would probably describe previously as showing weakness or failing. So it was okay because this disastrous thing was imposed on us. Everybody was struggling, so we could struggle with them and justify pulling back, taking time for ourselves, taking stock, looking at doing things differently. But I know that you are not alone in saying that COVID gave us permission, and that's a really interesting reflection, isn't it? And also then your words around the fact that you had these multiple areas in your life that you wanted to be good, and that reminds me of I know you've read Dr. Pippa Grange's book as well. Dr. Pippa Grange, a psychologist who worked with the England football team in 2018. She, no, that was a misquote. Sorry, it's not her. It's Jessamy Hibbert, who has written a book on imposter syndrome. And one of her definitions of a form of imposter syndrome is someone who needs to be perfect, not just in one area of life, but in multiple areas. And so, if one of those falls below par, then it's an overall failure. And I hear what you said there, Helen, that actually you wanted your kids to be the priority, and I'm sure very few mums would argue with that sense. And yet our commitment and our sense of duty to our vocation is so strong that it will lead us to a point where we sometimes get that balance, not wrong, but not in the way that we want it to be.
Yeah, and I think it is culturally, socially driven that, hopefully, Jo, you're going about changing the narrative for the next generation. I mean, that's why I'm so love your work, really, because this is all about saying it's okay to think about these strategies early. And I hope that anybody listening to this podcast would recognize that starting early on the process of self-examination really can help reduce, just enhance enjoyment of life. I think it's something that we've touched on a lot in coaching around giving yourself permission to feel joy and to seek it out. And we've obviously discussed how I've integrated that with my patients, and there's absolutely no doubt that going through this coaching process and kind of like leading from the front and having to self-examine quite painfully at times my own self, that's very I found that very empowering for my patients, because I can talk aspects of this from personal experience. And so it's not that I'm just saying it's okay to do things that you enjoy, and how that's going to help our well-being, which totally affects how pain plays out in our lives. It's actually that I believe it. So it's not me just talking a good game anymore. It's coming from the self. And the irony of all of this is that actually our business has never been so busy, because the demand for there's so many aspects of that. I know that lots of physio businesses right now are really busy as a result of COVID, but in terms of the demand of the sort of services that I offer, in terms of the persistent pain stuff, you know, I am, you know, there's so much demand out there for that service. Yeah. And I just can't stress enough the importance of being able to lead from the inside rather than just talk a good game.
Oh, I love that phrase, leading from the inside. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know exactly what you mean by that, Helen. And I love the way you have integrated this with patients. Just to let people know, Helen has introduced amazing questions into her subjective, like how do you take care of yourself, and where do you find joy in your life? And I think it's actually a courageous act to put that in your subjective history. And also that reference to leadership. So I'm really interested and intrigued by leadership in all spheres, but obviously healthcare is a particular interest. And yeah, I think what Helen just said, leading from the inside, being brave enough to show that you have made decisions, sometimes on the basis of how to look after yourself, how to find joy, how to enjoy your job and create an environment that feels joyful. And, you know, I can hear all the yes buts going on, and they're going on in my head as well. We're in vocations that ask so much of us, and the demand never seems to stop. But I think you could wait your whole career for someone to give you permission to do something about that. Or, as you're describing here, Helen, you just start to nudge the boundaries and start to give yourself permission rather than waiting to get it from somebody else. And you also made reference to a thought you have about, or some advice you might have for people starting out in their career to engage in this process of self-examination early. How early do you think is right, Helen? And no, let me ask you that question first, not give you another multi-layer one. What are your thoughts as to how early that would be sensible?
Yeah, I mean, look, deep down culturally, I'd love this to be something in secondary education.
Yeah.
You know, around this awareness of self. When I did the CSP leadership program, I was on the first cohort. I think it was 2017. I'm not great with dates. And you know, we did the full. It was the 4D profiling, but we did the full profiling, and it's the first time I've really sat down and done that sort of thing, and it really helped inform me of where my strengths are and perhaps my challenges are in terms of sort of navigating in terms of my skill set. And you know, it was interesting because, you know, talking to some of the mentors there, they could see their profiling change as their awareness had changed, because they were aware of the need to have balance across the profile. You know, in terms of, you know, for example, I'm really good with ideas. You know, you give me a paperclip. I actually remember doing this exercise with No Pain Mike on his course, and it was like, what are the uses of this paperclip? And you had a minute to think of the uses of this paperclip, and I just came out with a ridiculously high number of ways in which you could use a paperclip. And you know, I'm really green. I really like team play. I really like think about the end person. But you know, if I identify certain other aspects, you know, like my blue, my data driven, my appliance to the thought and the you know, the rationale of the data, I won't prioritize that, and I'm not particularly red and direct. And so if I'd have known some of these things earlier on in my life, I would have been able, I think, to navigate certain situations much more authentically, much more with a lot less stress. So you know, when I think about it, I think that within physiotherapy education, I'd love to see something around leadership put in at an undergrad level, because what is you know, we talk a lot about Brené Brown, you and I, and you know, one of the big things around, I don't know if you've seen her Anatomy of Trust, but there's something in there around the generosity. So, you know, we always giving the other person the generosity that they are also doing their best.
Yeah.
And actually, if we understand ourselves and how we interact with others, we can actually see and give that generosity much easier if we're self-aware. Because and so yeah, I think that actually harnessing it in physiotherapy education would be great, because one of the things I've noticed in my career is this sort of stuff. What I mean by stuff is self-examination. So prioritizing my CPD budget last year into life coaching rather than learning the next clinical thing.
Yeah.
You know, is not culturally something that we do, and there's very much a type of person. This is my take, that will do that. And I'm very surrounded by lots of inspirational people in my life who've done it in some shape or form. So I've been inspired as much by them to go that way. But there's an awful lot of people that would, you know, perhaps a little bit scared of what they might find. I think, and so if it's not part of the culture when we're doing it at undergrad level, I think we'd lose people even to the possibility of that starting. You know, if we socially normalize it, in some way, as part of a course, it's so fundamental to how we as professionals and the profession can go forward, I think.
You're so right about the normalizing it early, and I completely agree with you that there is possibly this notion that too much self-examination is either going to uncover, or the only purpose of self-examination is to uncover deep, dark things, or that if you engage in too much self-examination, ergo self-indulgence, then it's detracting you from the proper part of the job. But I think you've just described beautifully, Helen, when you were talking about starting this process as early as secondary education, and you know, I'm sure you would then mean to develop that in physiotherapy school, to start this process early of what I would interpret as really understanding your own personal brand of brilliance. The purpose for that is to make sure that when you then engage in that process that we all do of trying to do our best, we're doing our best in the areas which we are uniquely suited for, which in turn will give us joy, because we'll be in that beautiful flow state where we're doing what we were put on this planet to do, and it will dovetail and fit so beautifully with the next person who has a slightly different brand of brilliance and understands themselves well enough to put themselves in position to be doing that, and to ask for help or not do the other parts of the job which they're not so well suited for. And while you were talking, I wrote down a note, self-compassion, because that comes, self-examination and self-compassion, I think, are quite synonymous, but I know that there's an awful lot of discomfort around the phrase of self-compassion. But for me, they are one and the same, in that self-compassion involves firstly self-examination, so a good understanding of yourself, and then circles back to this idea of permission and I guess forgiveness for the parts of us which, you know, maybe I don't know, maybe you hoped you would come out as brilliant with data. Maybe not. It's probably not the most sexy part of a profile to come out, but you know, you might, someone else might do this profiling tool, and you know, it might come out that actually they're not the person that should be at the top of an organization. Their particular brand of brilliance is not suited to leading other people. It's perhaps due to scoping out new ideas and being creative with the paperclip, for example. So I think your idea of normalizing it is absolutely spot on, and can only be the best thing for not just our professions, but organizations as a whole, don't you think?
Absolutely. And it's also, you know, look, I've always played team sport. So and I was always I was a social secretary at university. I was the social sec of the physio school. I was the social sec of University of Birmingham Hockey Club. I was the one that got on the team largely because I was good fun to be with. I think I always say that. That's just putting myself down really. But look, that's where my strengths are. And actually, what's really what I've realised over the years is sometimes actually the people that when I'm choosing to work with perhaps are a little bit too much like me, and actually understanding the importance of having. So we talked a lot in the CSP leadership program about the colour profile, but if we talk around this blue and the red, which are not where my strengths, or that's more where I have to put the work in, and being aware I have to put.
What was the red, Helen? Forgive me, I picked up the
so
blue data. But...
Yeah, well, the blue is sort of reflective, analytical, and the red is around being sort of direct. It's kind of the ability really to say what you want and what you think directly, really. And actually, the impact of myself, I can see we did a lot of work around sort of getting an awareness of what the other person we're interacting with is around those colour sort of, you can tell you're gonna coerce well in this way with these sorts of profiles, and I could see where the challenges were, and actually having that awareness, making sure that actually moving forward with recruitment and those sorts of things, making sure that actually we've got balance across that profile, it would be really helpful, because one of the key things that came out of that leadership program and where I'm sat today is that when you run your own business and you are your own boss, the accountability piece, where does that lie? And that lies, with yourself, particularly for me, because I haven't got a co-director. I haven't got somebody else that holds me to account. So, I tend to, up till this point, I've naturally gone towards my strength area, and I've just kind of like ignored all the stuff that needed to work for the whole system. If you think, of the whole profiling thing being like system wide, for that whole system of the business to thrive, actually we need a balance throughout all of those sort of profiles. So if only I look, no regrets. I am who I am because I am where I am at this point, and possibly when you reach midlife and you're just realize you're not messing around anymore, things different change, and maybe I would never have had that insight when I in my youth. I think there comes a point where we reflect differently when we know we're not messing around anymore, and we know how we don't want to be. So it's perhaps more powerful. I don't know, because I didn't do it. But if I was advising somebody going forward early on, and I certainly have a niece who is currently a physio student, and we have lots of interesting conversations around leadership and around understanding oneself, and how we might react, and then how we could actually be aware of the other person, and I'd like to think that as a legacy, it's giving that generation more permission, not that we should ask for it, of course, but more inspiration, if you like, to know this is actually fundamentally, let's put the patient at the front of this, fundamentally good for our patients, because again, the more what's I've not even got the language for that, but the happy physios make happy patients.
Yes.
So we just it's a painful journey, and that's why I say I think in terms of undergraduate level, it's a good place to start, because our life experiences can be very different and very painful. And if we're not careful, we can bury that all underneath the carpet, and getting it, anatomy, physiology, are really, really important for physiotherapy. But all the knowledge in the world doesn't change how we communicate, and even how we communicate. A lot of our reflections in that leadership program was around how we communicated with certain patients, and how actually certain patients we do really well with, and others we don't, and actually understanding ourselves, how we interact, as much as our patients, because that's all we can control. We can only control ourselves. So
yes. Do you think as a profession we reward a certain type of personality to the exclusion of others? So I identify with that kind of social secretary persona. That isn't all sides of my personality, but it's one that I played to the max at probably a similar age to when you're talking about, teens and young adulthood. It was a persona that I found to be very acceptable to others, one that I had easy access to, and I definitely overplayed that card. Not that I regret it. It brought me a lot of success, a lot of great friendships, a lot of joy. But I think certainly within physiotherapy, I felt that part of me was very welcome. And as I've gone through my career and I guess been brave and vulnerable enough to expose other parts of my personality, I haven't always felt they are so welcome. The more sort of analytical, introspective side, for example, and that's still within a very, very narrow bracket of white middle class woman. Do you think we are genuinely open to rewarding enough types of variety to create this environment that you're describing, where we have a very varied cohort of patients, and ideally you have a very varied cohort of people with the right skills and the right attributes for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think, look, anybody who's seen some of my spats on social media, of which I've now gone away from because they go nowhere, we'll see a trail of kind of like me trying to force this whole thing on somebody. And it's a bit like a belief system when when we're working with a patient who believes that they are damaged and broken, and they've got an MRI scan to prove it, and me going in there and trying to tackle that education straight on. There's a massive backfire effect. And I think all the sort of the social media culture has been very evolutionary. And I think a fair number of us have adapted and seen that this is not something we can force. Introspection is not something we can force on people. It's just like physio. It's I liken I think it's probably just because I've gone down a route, as you know, of adapting cognitive functional therapy into my physiotherapy practice, which is led by an amazing group of researchers, and particularly by Peter O'Sullivan. And you watch that work, and people talk about it being talking therapy, and it's not talking therapy, it's doing therapy, through learning that body mindfulness through your body. And that's exactly what sort of I've done with the coaching. It's not, you can't talk me into you can't talk me into believing I'm worth it. I've got to do it. And I think social media, it depends which route you go in at, but it's just so, it has its capacity to be quite soundbite. If you're really good at sound bites, it can create some really good messages that will get retweeted. But in person, how good does that mean you are with patients, or in navigating the really, really tricky parts of what our profession involves. And it was really interesting, actually. I've just come off a virtual workshop with Peter O'Sullivan, which was, I was really worried that it was going to be non-engaging, because I normally go to the ones in person, and it was far better than in person, because we saw the transition of patients. So normally we'd see somebody being assessed and treated, and it looked all great, but we all know that these things can look great after our first session and off they go. But this was actually watching somebody across a course of months being treated. So, like, you'd have a summary, you'd see the summary of 8 sessions or something. Look, it was amazing, because he's so inspiring. He's not, Peter's so inspiring. He's prepared to put himself up there and accept, he started the course with, I am, this is not perfect. This is imperfect. It's full of imperfections. And it was so perfectly imperfect, because he struggled. So we had exactly this case of somebody who was really struggling with their belief system, and there was a chat going on. I'm getting to the point of my story here, Joe, but there was this point, and we're all going, I put in there, I was like, oh my God, this is so inspiring, because if Peter's struggling to get this message across, that kind of like makes me think I'm not, actually we are all human, and he still got there. What was amazing, there was this like light bulb moment of this patient that just totally got this messaging, and he did brilliantly. But what was really interesting in some of the post chat was how people really liked this format.
Right.
And some introverts put, I can't remember, on some sort of stream saying I actually loved it, because as an introvert I would normally be so guarded in a course situation. And you saw in the chat the whole way through, there was some banter going on for those people that like banter, and there was also some very intelligent, very specific questions that perhaps would never have got asked in person. And she made a comment that it was such a better environment for her. And I think moving forward as a profession, I would like to see an environment where we do embrace everybody. And that's really the diversity, equality, inclusion conversation, isn't it? That I know the CSP is really that's really keen on right now. And I'm all for that. The older I get, the wiser I get, the less judgmental I am, and I'm training myself. I'm aware. I train myself out of that. I think it's always going to help people and the profession if we are all different, but don't think that, or accepting the difference is what's going to bring the magic, really.
Yeah, and what I hear in your words is, very wisely, not ramming any particular method or implying any particular need, not ramming it down people's throat. But it's hard not to use very trite metaphors here. But what I hear is you sort of describing creating or clearing the path so that people can walk along it, and however long that takes, whatever diversions they choose to take, being allowing that process to happen. And also, if greats like Peter O'Sullivan are prepared to stand up and be imperfect, then it just widens that path for the rest of us, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And look, vulnerability is making yourself vulnerable is scary, and again, key part of all of my recent learning of self is that it's uncomfortable, and learning to become comfortable with the uncomfortable was a big part of our learning process in our CSP leadership program and beyond. And the more I accept that, because I think naturally as a person I would probably go away from the discomfort. So for me, learning about my profession, clinical learning, for me, it's comfortable. And yet learning about certain bits of my profile within my business that's not so comfortable, I've just avoided because I didn't have that accountability.
Mm.
So it's I think being aware of that moving forward is where I, like, I just know that I've possibly got to have, can I really change to be totally accountable to myself? Maybe not. And maybe patients don't ever get to the point where they can be totally accountable for themselves either. And having somebody, I treat a lot of persistent pain patients who don't want to be discharged because I'm their accountability partner.
Yeah.
And we have a culture around physiotherapy that we should be discharging people and we should only be seeing them for so many sessions, and that's kind of like become embedded. I think that as long as we're having an honest discussion about that's what we're doing, it's okay to say that you can come back for that, because it's an act of self-compassion in its own right, for you to identify that's what you need. That's really what self-compassion is, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. Identifying what you need, and yes, forgiving yourself for the fact that you need it and being open and vulnerable enough to ask for the right help. Absolutely. And Helen, I'm aware of time. I know you've been so kind giving me your time this morning, and I know you've got to go and see a patient. But thank you so much for another great honest conversation. I just want to give you the opportunity, if you've got a moment, because I know that you are recruiting at the moment, and Helen is the other side of the country from me, but if I was looking for a job and I was anywhere near Helen, then I'd be gagging for this opportunity. So Helen, please feel free to just let people know what's going on at Prestons Health, how they can contact you, and if there's anything else you want to say about what you're up to in the future.
Thanks, Jo. So through this whole process, I've realised I need a co-pilot of this business. So I've got a great team working with me, and I've actually got a team member from Spain who came over from Spain who is leaving us. So I'm redefining this role to be a development role within the practice. So clinically, I think I've put it down clinically, management, in terms of we've got some opportunities to grow our clinic in different satellite areas. So setting that up together and working on the leadership part together. And what I actually felt was I wanted to take a different direction with this role, and instead of giving a CPD budget of traditional clinical CPD, which we can work on together within the clinic, there are lots of resources that we can allocate as a clinic virtually with the help of the Physio Matters team to help us develop clinically. So actually, where would I want I want the type of person that wants to do this introspection, because I do believe that they're going to be the people that are going to be the happiest working with me and working with our patients, and therefore working with the business. So we're actually going to give some life coaching to that individual should they want it, as well. So it's a role that will be totally new for me. It's an employed role, full-time, here in Peterborough, but also in surrounding areas of Stamford and Oundle. I'm looking for somebody to help me think differently about the business, who's inspired to want to give the best for the patients in a private environment. And so it's quite a different job to traditional private practice of just coming in, doing your patients and going home again.
Oh, I can't imagine how anyone could listen to that description and not feel excited by it. And once again, I applaud you, Helen, for doing things your way, doing it a little bit differently, and with such a broad-minded view of what's right for the patients that are going to receive care and the person that might move into that role to be your co-pilot. Fantastic. And how would people contact you if they had any interest in talking to you about that role?
So our website is prestonshealth.co.uk. There's a contact form on there. Oh goodness me, I don't even know what my Twitter handle is.
Oh, does anyone? I forget every time someone asks me.
Let me just
don't worry, we'll
at Prestons Health.
People know.
Yeah. So it's at Prestons Health. And you can contact me on my email, or our clinic email is admin@prestonshealth.co.uk.
Brilliant. Right, well, we better go and let you share your magic with that next lucky patient. Thank you so much for giving me your time this morning, Helen, and thank you so much for bringing yourself forward for coaching and for the continuing friendship that I know you and I are going to have.
Great. Thanks so much, Jo.
Pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
I loved that conversation. I love the sound of that job. I'm actually quite glad that my clinic is the other side of the country to Helen's, or I'd be a little bit concerned that some of the people that work for me might be sorely tempted to go and relocate to Peterborough. What an amazingly forward-thinking approach to recruitment and job roles, and also to the way that Helen approaches interactions with her patients, particularly those in her speciality of pain. I think Helen is a really good example of someone who has moved through this age of change and has embraced it in recent years and has made herself very open, vulnerable at times, but is really seeing the benefits of going with that vulnerability, reframing certain things which not just she had held true for so long, but generations before her had done the same. And I think hearing her go through that process is inspiring. And I hope those of you listening, whatever stage of your career path or clinical path you're on, found some things that were useful and helpful, maybe made you think a little bit. If there's anything you strongly agree with, disagree with, would like to add to, then please do email me. I always love to hear your comments. And yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you again at the next episode of You Matter. Oh, I forgot to say, as always, of course, if you are like Helen and I, busy clinicians looking after lots of people in all spheres of your life, all day and every day, then absolutely you matter.